The rich farmer stole his water for 12 years. One old survey map got it all back. The creek ran dry on a Tuesday in July of 1987. That was when Virgil Cutter first knew something was wrong. The water had come down off the ridgeline every spring since his father broke ground on the property in 1949, fed by snowmelt from the Calhoun Range, and collected into a shallow stone-lined channel that ran along the east boundary of the farm. Virgil had been irrigating his 34 acres in Prentiss County, Montana, from that channel for 23 years. He was 54 years old. Had 2 boys, a failing Alice Chalmers WD-45 tractor, and no other water source within reasonable distance. He walked the channel that first morning, all 600 feet of it, from where it emerged through the fence line at the northern edge of his property to where it emptied into the lower pasture. The stone was dry. The mud at the bottom had begun to crack. A few low spots held puddles, not flowing water. He got on his knees at one of them and pressed his palm to the earth. Nothing moving, nothing coming. He kept walking north, past his fence, up the slope toward the Hargrove property. Gerald Hargrove ran 1,800 acres along the western face of the Calhoun Range, mostly cattle, some dryland wheat. The Hargrove family had been in Prentiss County since before statehood. Gerald was the 3rd generation. He was 61 that summer, drove a new GMC Sierra, and served on the county water board. He had 4 ranch hands and a lawyer in Missoula who handled his water rights documentation. Virgil Cutter had none of those things. He followed the dry channel bed up the slope for a quarter mile until he found it. A concrete headgate, freshly poured. 8 inches wide, valve-operated, with a new galvanized handle still bright from the factory. It sat at the intake point where the creek branch split, and it was closed. Not partially closed. Closed flat. All the water that had historically come down toward Virgil's property was being redirected east, across the Hargrove Range, into a stock pond Gerald had built the previous fall. The pond was roughly 2 acres in size. Virgil stood at the gate and looked at it for a while. He didn't say anything. Turned around, walked back down. That afternoon he drove into Denton, the county seat, and asked at the county clerk's office about water rights filings. The woman at the desk pulled the relevant records for the creek branch. Hargrove had filed a new diversion claim in March of that year. The filing had been processed and approved in May. It was all properly documented, properly signed, properly recorded. Virgil asked if his own water rights had been part of the review. The woman looked through the file again. His name didn't appear in it. He drove home, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table looking at the dry field through the window. The wheat he'd planted that spring was already showing stress. The soil along the eastern quarter was pale and cracked at the surface, not yet destroyed but moving in that direction. He'd planted 18 acres of winter wheat and 6 acres of barley. The wheat needed water by August, or it wouldn't head out properly. The barley was more forgiving. Not forgiving enough. He called his neighbor Ray Engstrom that evening. Ray ran a 90-acre spread 2 miles south and had dealt with the county water board twice in the previous decade. Ray told him to get a lawyer. Said Hargrove had connections on that board going back 20 years. Said it wouldn't be simple. Virgil asked how much a lawyer would cost. Ray didn't answer that directly. Said it would depend on how complicated things got. Said water rights cases in Montana could run long. Virgil thanked him and hung up. He had $4,200 in a savings account at First Bank of Denton. He had a $12,000 equipment loan on the WD-45 overhaul he'd done the previous year, the machine still not running right. His wheat crop, at expected market price, would bring in roughly $9,000 if it came in full. Without water, He'd be lucky to see half that. He did the math at the kitchen table twice. The second time, he got the same answer as the first. He couldn't afford a lawyer, not for a long case. He drove back to the county clerk's office 2 days later, asked to see everything on file related to his property and the creek. The clerk pulled the records again and let him sit with them at a side table. He went through them for 2 hours. His own water rights claim, filed by his father in 1952, was on file. It referenced the creek branch as a secondary source to the main creek documented in the original homestead filing. The language was clear enough. He had rights to the flow. What he couldn't find was what would establish his prior claim against Hargrove's newer diversion. He asked the clerk if there were older records. Survey records. Maps from the original land grants or the pre-statehood period. The clerk said those would be in the state archives in Helena. Said they weren't digitized. Said if he wanted to look at them, he'd have to go in person. Virgil drove to Helena the following Thursday, 4 hours each way, one overnight at a motel on the edge of town that charged $38 per night. He sat in the Montana Historical Society's records room for 6 hours. The archivist, a woman named Patricia Dahl, who had worked there since 1974, helped him locate the relevant county survey series. The maps dated from the General Land Office surveys conducted between 1888 and 1891, during the period of active homesteading. She showed him how to read them. He found the Prentiss County survey sheets after an hour. They were hand-drawn, penciled on linen-backed paper, faded to sepia at the edges. Each section was numbered. The creek branch was shown as a natural feature, labeled as a seasonal watercourse, running the full length of what was now the boundary between his property and the Hargrove Range. The date on the survey was October of 1889. Then, he found something else. The original survey showed the water course running not just through the section currently mapped as its natural channel, but through a branch point 200 yards further upstream than where the current creek ran. The 1889 line showed the water splitting into 2 branches at that upper point, with the western branch, the one serving what was now his property, annotated as the primary natural drainage for the lower valley floor. The eastern branch, the one now diverted into Hargrove's stock pond, was marked secondary. Virgil sat very still for a moment. He asked Patricia Dahl if he could get a copy of the relevant sheets. She told him the archives had a photographic reproduction service. Cost $4 per sheet. He needed 7 sheets to document the full watercourse. $28. He paid it. He drove home the next morning with the photocopies folded carefully in a manila envelope on the passenger seat of his Ford F-150. Stopped once for coffee and a gas fill at a station outside White Sulphur Springs. Didn't stop again. At home, he spread the copies on the kitchen table alongside his current county records and his father's original water rights filing from 1952. He looked at all 3 documents together for a long time. The survey map was from 1889. The water rights filing was from 1952. Hargrove's diversion claim was from 1987. The chain was clear if he could explain it clearly enough to someone who could act on it. He called Ray Engstrom that night. Ray listened to the whole thing. Then he said Virgil needed to talk to someone at the State Department of Natural Resources and Conservation, not a lawyer. The DNRC had a water rights bureau that handled exactly this type of dispute. Ray said they'd processed a boundary water case in Judith Basin County the year before, and it hadn't cost the small farmer $1 in legal fees. Said it was worth a phone call. Virgil called the DNRC office in Helena the following Monday morning. A man named Dennis Pruitt handled water rights in the Prentiss County District. He was polite, careful, not given to promises. He told Virgil to mail him copies of everything he had: the original claim, the survey sheets, the current county filings, whatever documentation he'd gathered. Virgil mailed the envelope that afternoon, sent it certified, return receipt. Cost $4.80. He waited. His wheat continued to dry out. By the end of July, 3 of his 18 acres in the eastern quarter showed visible tip burn. The stalks were still standing, but the heads had not filled out. He walked that section every morning. Pulled a head here and there, rubbed the grain between his fingers. It was light. Too light. He called Pruitt on August 3rd. Pruitt said he'd received the materials and was reviewing them, said the 1889 survey was unusually detailed for its era, and that the annotation on the water branch was significant. Said he was cross-referencing with 3 other historical documents. Virgil asked how long it would take. Pruitt said a determination could be made within 60 days. Said enforcement of an administrative water rights decision could take longer. Said if Virgil needed immediate temporary relief, he would need a district court order. Temporary relief. Virgil turned the words over. That meant a judge. A judge meant a lawyer. He sat there with the phone in his hand. He asked Pruitt what the standard was for obtaining a temporary order. Pruitt said the legal standard was irreparable harm. Said a crop already in the ground and visibly failing would likely qualify. Said Virgil should look into whether Prentiss County had a legal aid office. It did. Virgil drove in the next morning. The office was staffed by a woman named Karen Belford, a University of Montana law graduate who had been practicing agricultural and water law in the county for 3 years. She looked at his materials in less than 20 minutes. She told him the 1889 survey was significant. Said it constituted primary documentation of the watercourse's original natural drainage pattern, which predated any of the modern filings on either side. Said if Pruitt's office supported the interpretation, it would establish Hargrove's diversion as contrary to senior water rights under the prior appropriation doctrine. Montana had operated under that doctrine since territorial days. First in time, first in right. She told him she could file for a temporary emergency order if the DNRC issued a supporting determination. Said her fee for the application would be $200. Said if they won the temporary order, the rest of the case would likely resolve from there. Virgil wrote a check for $200. Pruitt's written determination arrived on September 11, 1987, 11 pages. The language was precise and heavily documented. The 1889 General Land Office Survey Sheet, Section 14 of the Prentiss County Field Atlas, established the western branch of the unnamed creek as the primary natural drainage feature for the valley floor parcels downstream. Virgil's father's 1952 water rights claim had correctly cited this feature as a recognized source. Hargrove's 1987 diversion headgate, placed at the fork point, was inconsistent with the documented natural order of flow and appeared to conflict with the senior rights established in the downstream claim. Hargrove's lawyer in Missoula filed a response within 2 weeks. Contested the interpretation of the survey language, argued the 1889 annotation was descriptive rather than legal, and that Hargrove's 1987 filing followed proper procedure. Karen Belford countered with the prior appropriation doctrine. With the DNRC determination, with the photographs Virgil had taken of the headgate installation and the dry channel bed. The Prentiss County District Court issued a temporary restraining order on October 2, 1987. Gerald Hargrove's headgate was to be opened to restore natural flow to the downstream channel within 48 hours, pending final adjudication of the water rights dispute. Gerald Hargrove opened the gate. Water came down the channel 2 days later. Virgil was standing at the lower end of the stone-lined ditch when it arrived. It came slowly at first, filling the low spots in the cracked mud, then moving faster as the upstream flow built behind it. It reached the lower pasture just before noon. His wheat crop that year lost 7 of the 18 acres to the water deprivation. He harvested 11 acres in late October, brought in $5,600 instead of the projected $9,000. The barley held. He got $3,400 for that. Total season, $9,000. Not a good year. Not a ruined one. The formal adjudication of the water rights was completed the following spring. The DNRC issued its final administrative determination in March of 1988. Virgil Cutter's 1952 water rights claim, predicated on the 1889 survey documentation, was affirmed as senior to Hargrove's 1987 diversion filing. Hargrove was required to remove the diversion headgate, or modify it, to allow 100% of the natural flow to continue downstream to the Cutter property. The stock pond he'd built could continue to function only from his own properly documented water allocations, which were separate from the creek branch. Hargrove's Missoula lawyer filed 2 additional challenges through 1988. Both were dismissed at the district level without further hearing. The second dismissal came in November. The total cost to Virgil for the 2-year process, $200 to Karen Belford, $28 for the archive reproductions, $38 for the Helena Motel, and $4.80 for the certified mailing. $270.80 in total. Hargrove's legal costs, based on what Karen Belford later heard through the county bar, were somewhere above $14,000. The water came back fully in the spring of 1988 and continued each year after that. Virgil replanted the 7 damaged acres that April with winter wheat and treated them the same as the rest. They came in at full yield. He had a good year in 1988 and a better one in 1989. By 1991, he'd paid off the equipment loan on the Alice Chalmers overhaul. The survey maps stayed in the manila envelope in his desk drawer. He looked at them twice more over the years. Once in 1994, when there was a question about a fence line on the south boundary, not water-related, but the same archive process proved useful again. Once in 2001, when a county planning meeting touched on water rights documentation in the Calhoun Range watershed, and Virgil attended and brought copies. He told 2 other farmers in Prentiss County about the archive process in the years that followed. Both had water boundary questions of their own. He told them what Patricia Dahl had shown him, how to read the section numbers, what the annotations meant, how much the copies cost. Gerald Hargrove sold the 1,800 acres in 1996 and moved to Arizona. The new owner ran the ranch differently. Never contested the water arrangement. Came over once in the first year and introduced himself. Stood at the fence line and looked at the creek. Asked Virgil how long the water had been running that way. Virgil told him 1889 was the first recorded date. That was when the surveyors had come through and mapped it. The new owner nodded, said that seemed clear enough, went back to his side of the fence. Virgil Cutter farmed the 34 acres in Prentiss County for another 14 years after that. Retired in 2002 at the age of 69. Sold the property to his older son Dale, who still runs it. The stone-lined channel was repaired and widened in 2006, but it follows the same course it always did. Still fed by snowmelt off the Calhoun Range. Still running every spring. The manila envelope with the survey copies is in the farmhouse desk drawer. Dale knows where it is, has been told what it contains and why it matters. The water has come down every year since 1988. Never missed a spring. Still does.